In 1973, shortly after Bruce Lee's death, a dossier discreetly reached the hands of some of his closest students. It wasn't an obituary. It wasn't a tribute. It was a warning. The document, which circulated for years only among initiates and which few outside that circle ever saw, described something that Bruce had begun to realize in the last months of his life. Jeet Kune Do was being distorted, not by ignorant people, but by people who understood him very well. And this is the part that no one tells you. Official history says that JKD was the great liberation of martial arts, a philosophy that broke shackles, that said, don't follow rigid forms, flow like water. It's beautiful, it's true. But there is a side to this story that has been shelved or deliberately silenced for decades. Because when you create a philosophy that rejects rules, that values efficiency above all else, that teaches the practitioner to see each situation as a battle to be won, you also create a tool, and tools don't choose the hands that wield them. In Dan Inosanto's personal files, recovered and partially released only in the 2000s, there are records of conversations Bruce had in the last months of his life. Conversations where he demonstrated growing restlessness, where he wondered out loud if he had been wrong to make JKD so open, so adaptable, so dangerous in the wrong hands. He was watching his creation being kidnapped. And what happened next is one of the most disturbing and least told stories in the world of martial arts. You'll understand why she was kept out of the spotlight for so long.
To understand what was being silenced, you first need to understand what Bruce Lee actually created and why it was so much more dangerous than any kick or punch. Jeet Kune Do was officially born in 1967, but its gestation began years before, within a frustrated, restless, and deeply dissatisfied Bruce Lee with what he saw in traditional martial arts. He had been training Wing Chun since he was a child in Hong Kong, under the tutelage of Ip Man and respected tradition. But the more he fought, the more he tested his knowledge against practitioners of other styles, the more he realized he was trapped in a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, limiting inside. The big provocation that changed everything was a specific fight. In 1964, Bruce faced Wong Jock Man in San Francisco, a fight that is still fought in detail today, but whose emotional impact on Bruce is documented. Regardless of who won, Bruce left there unsatisfied. He felt like he had fought in a cast, trapped in patterns that his own body had memorized without question. That night, something broke inside him. And from the break was born liberation. JKD was not a style. This is the first thing Bruce made absolutely clear, and also the first thing most people distorted. It explicitly said, Jeet Kune Do is just a name, don't get attached to it. It was a philosophical anti-philosophy, a system built to destroy systems. Its central principle was not a technique, it was a mental stance. Absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, add what is specifically yours. This, in the context of the 60s, was revolutionary in a way that went beyond martial arts. Think about the world Bruce Lee was in. The United States was experiencing the effervescence of a period of brutal cultural rupture, civil rights, counterculture, questioning of all established authority. And here was an Asian man at a time when Asians were stereotyped and marginalized in Hollywood, saying publicly that all traditions should be questioned, that no master should be followed blindly, that a fighter's truth lay within himself, not in books, not in masters, not in ancestral ways. It was subversive. It was magnetic. It was, for many, exactly what they wanted to hear. And therein lies the problem that no one likes to discuss openly.
When you create a philosophy based on the rejection of external rules and the absolute appreciation of individual efficiency, you give the practitioner an enormous responsibility. It presupposes that he has the maturity, ethics, and discernment necessary to use this freedom constructively. Bruce assumed that. He genuinely believed that the process of self-knowledge that JKD required would naturally purify the practitioner, that you could not reach the depths of philosophy without maturing as a human being. But the philosophy reached people before they matured. What was circulating in gyms, on the streets, in conversations among young people fascinated by Bruce Lee was not the depth of thought. It was the most seductively dangerous fragment. There are no rules, only efficiency. Without the context, without the years of reflection Bruce had invested, this fragment sounded like permission, a philosophical license to do whatever was necessary as long as it worked. And there are records, discreet, never widely publicized, that this began to happen during Bruce's life. Groups that used the JKD language, its terminology, its principles, but applied it to contexts that Bruce never imagined. Not just street fights, something more organized, colder, more deliberate. Bruce started receiving reports, not directly, always filtered, always with layers of distance between him and the events, but enough to plant a doubt that, according to people close to him, haunted him more and more in the last months of his life. The doubt was not about the validity of his philosophy. It was about whether he had overestimated humanity when creating it. And that question, simple, devastating, with no easy answer, affected Bruce Lee in a way that his films, his interviews, and his public image never showed. How exactly did this realization change the man inside? This is what comes next.
For almost 30 years, what Bruce Lee thought in the last months of his life was constructed from interviews, public statements, and romanticized memories. The image was coherent: a man at his peak, productive, brilliant, working on multiple projects simultaneously, about to conquer Hollywood in a way that no Asian had managed before. This image is not false, but it is incomplete in a way that changes everything. When part of the personal archives of Dan Inosanto, Bruce's closest student, the man he chose to continue his legacy, began to be cataloged and partially accessible in the 2000s, martial arts researchers and historians found something they didn't expect. It wasn't just technical records, training notes, or film correspondence. There was a set of recorded conversations, some on magnetic tape, others transcribed by hand by Inosanto himself, with the methodical precision of someone who knew he was documenting something important. And what these conversations revealed was a Bruce Lee the public had never seen. Not the serene master, not the confident philosopher, but a man who asked questions out loud that no movement leader usually asks. What if I was wrong? In one of the transcripts, referenced by researchers who had access to the material, although the full document was never published in its entirety, Bruce repeatedly returns to a specific theme. He wasn't worried about copycats. Imitators were inevitable and in some ways harmless. What disturbed him was different. It was the possibility that intelligent, disciplined, and technically competent people were using the JKD framework in a surgical way, not to liberate themselves, but to justify actions that did not require liberation, who already knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they found the perfect language for this in his philosophy. There is a phrase attributed to Bruce in these conversations that has never been widely quoted because, out of context, it just seems like philosophical melancholy. In context, it's disturbing. He reportedly said in one of these sessions with Inosanto, "I gave people a mirror. I didn't think some would use the mirror to aim." Think about what this means.
JKD taught the practitioner to know themselves with surgical depth, their strengths, their limitations, their combat psychology. It was a process of applied self-knowledge. And that same process, that same refined analytical capacity, when directed outward to the cold, calculated study of a target, a situation, a victim, became something completely different. It became a methodology. Not a fighting style, a methodology. And here begins the part that very few people know about, because those who did know about it had very concrete reasons for not talking about it. In the months leading up to his death in July 1973, Bruce had been contacted indirectly and always through intermediaries about a specific group operating on the West Coast of the United States. It wasn't ordinary gang. They were not unsophisticated fanatics. They were serious practitioners, some with years of legitimate martial arts training, who had built an internal structure based explicitly on JKD principles. They used her terminology, they cited his writings, and they applied the concept of maximum efficiency in a way that Bruce had never contemplated when he formulated it. What exactly this group did still remains partially unclear, but there is one detail in the files that none of the researchers who found it were able to ignore. In Inosanto's papers, there was an envelope separate from the others, no external identification. Inside, a list of names, some crossed out. A note in the top corner, in the handwriting recognized as Bruce's, "Do not show. Not yet." Not yet. That means he planned to show it at some point for someone. Bruce Lee died before that moment arrived, and the envelope was kept for decades until someone finally decided to ask what was inside. What that list contained is the surprise that completely changes everything you thought you knew about Bruce Lee's final days.
Before continuing, you need to understand something about how this story got here. What you are about to read is not in any official biography of Bruce Lee. It was not covered by the major outlets that documented his life and death. He does not appear in documentaries produced with the family's blessing. And there's a very specific reason for that, a reason you'll recognize immediately when you understand what was at stake. The people who knew chose silence, not out of cowardice, by calculation. Because going public meant making an impossible choice: either destroy the legacy of a man who had changed martial arts forever, or allow a dangerous narrative to continue circulating in the shadows without any counterpoint. And for decades, the guardians of this history chose a third option that no one openly discusses: letting time work. Waiting for those involved to grow old, die, disperse. The problem is that some stories refuse to die with the people who lived them. Let's get back to the main point, why the Jeet Kune Do kidnapping didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic moment, a visible rupture, something Bruce could clearly identify and directly confront. It was gradual, insidious. And he used exactly the most beautiful characteristic of his philosophy as a vector of infiltration. Remember, JKD had no rigid hierarchy. There was no central temple, no sacred scriptures, no single authority that could certify who was a legitimate practitioner and who was not. Bruce had built this intentionally because rigid hierarchies were exactly what he wanted to destroy. Anyone who absorbed the principles and applied them honestly was, in some sense, practicing JKD. It was an open door by design, and open doors don't choose who walks through them. The group that began to form on the West Coast in the late 1960s and early 1970s understood this with a clarity few had. They didn't come from the outside trying to break into something. They arrived from the inside, learning legitimately, training seriously, building credibility within networks of practitioners. Some had direct connections to instructors who had trained with Bruce himself.
They used the right language, demonstrated the right knowledge, asked the right questions. And while they were building this facade of legitimacy, they were building something else in parallel, a structure, a horizontal chain of command, no visible leaders, no documentable hierarchy, based on a principle they would take directly from Bruce's teachings. Each individual is responsible for their own efficiency. Nobody orders anyone. Everyone assesses the situation and acts as efficiently as possible. In the context of a dojo, this is liberation. In the context of what this group was doing, it was impunity with a philosophical veneer. The first signs came to Bruce in fragments, a report here, a name mentioned there, a situation described vaguely by someone unwilling to commit to details. It was always like this. Nobody delivered the complete picture because nobody had the complete picture. Each person had a piece, and the pieces, separated, seemed like isolated incidents. But Bruce had something the others didn't. He had created philosophy. He knew its principles not as a student, but as an architect. And when he began to receive these fragments, he recognized the pattern with disturbing speed, because it was the pattern he had drawn in self. The internal logic of the reports followed exactly the JKD framework: maximum efficiency, without attachment to forms, constant adaptation to the environment. He was reading the manual he had written, being used for purposes he had never imagined. And here's the detail that no biography mentions, the detail that was kept for decades and that completely transforms the way you will view the last months of Bruce Lee. He was not paralyzed. He decided to act. And the way he chose to act, discreet, calculated, completely outside the public character that the world knew, is the most disturbing and most human chapter in this entire story. What Bruce Lee did next, no one expected, not even the people closest to him.
For months, Bruce Lee did something that completely contradicted everything the world expected of him. He was quiet. Not publicly quiet. This was the usual Bruce, appearing in interviews, filming scenes, giving brilliant statements about philosophy and martial arts. But internally, in private conversations, in training sessions with his inner circle, there was a different silence. The silence of someone who is processing something too big to verbalize before fully understanding it. And as I processed, I watched. What few know, and what the archives suggest with a clarity that is uncomfortable, is that Bruce spent the last months of his life doing something extraordinarily humble for a man of his ego and his genius. He returned to basics, not to defend them, to question them. There are records of conversations where he revisited the texts he had written, the principles he had formulated, and read them with a new look. The look of someone trying to find where the door had been left too open, where philosophy had been too generous to those who did not deserve generosity. And what he found disturbed him in a way no physical adversary had ever done. He found that there was no wording error. The philosophy was correct, the principles were sound. The opening he had intentionally constructed was not a flaw, it was the essence. To remove this opening would be to destroy the JKD itself, to transform it into what it had spent its life fighting, a rigid, closed, controlling system. The problem was not in philosophy. The problem was having believed that philosophy would educate the people who received it, having assumed that the depth of the path would naturally filter out those who arrived with shallow or crooked intentions, having confused the elegance of a system with the guarantee of its results. It was a devastating conclusion for a man who had put his entire intellectual identity into creating this system. And then came the twist. In the last few months of his life, Bruce began to do something that no one around him could fully understand at the time. He became more selective, radically more selective about who he taught and in what depth.
Not publicly, not with statements or policy changes, but in private conversations, in closed sessions, there was a new screening, an additional layer of assessment that was non-technical. It was ethics. He had come to a conclusion that changed his relationship with his own legacy. A philosophy of freedom only works with people committed to responsibility. And responsibility cannot be taught with technique. It is taught with time, with proximity, with real relationships. He was, in his final months, mentally rebuilding the JKD, not its principles, but its transmission, the way it would be passed on, more carefully, with more human discretion and less unrestricted openness. Never had time to fully implement this. In July 1973, Bruce Lee died at the age of 32, and the questions he was asking, the revisions he was contemplating, the more thoughtful transmission system he was designing, all remained unfinished, stored in conversations, in fragments of paper, in memories of people who understood the magnitude of what they had witnessed years later. The group that had hijacked the principles of the JKD dissipated over time, without the intellectual catalyst that united them, without the structure that sustained them. It silently fragmented throughout the 1970s. But the question Bruce left remains. Every philosophy of freedom carries with it the risk of its own distortion, and the creator is rarely the one who defines the legacy. It's the interpreters. Bruce Lee knew this in the end, and this awareness, more than any fight he fought, was the true test of his character. If this story surprised you, if you made it this far and are thinking about something you didn't think about before you started reading, then you already understand why this channel exists. Here, we don't tell the stories that everyone else tells. We count those that remained in the archives, in private conversations, in the margins of official biographies. The stories that demand you question what you thought you knew. If this is what you were looking for, sign up now, activate the bell, because the next story we're preparing is even deeper and even less well known than this one. See you there.